The architecture of illusion. If you're just joining me, welcome. And if you've been here since the beginning, thank you for staying with it. I promised you at the end of the last section that I was going to show you how they maintain the illusion. And I'm going to do that. But before I do, I need to take you somewhere first. Because the maintenance only makes complete sense when you understand the full picture of what is being maintained. So bear with me. What I'm about to share is worth the detour. I want to start by saying something simple. Something I wish someone had said to me much earlier. There might be more to what you're going through than what is on the surface. Not to frighten you, but as an honest invitation to look a little deeper than you may have been willing to look before now. Because sometimes what feels like bad luck, what feels like a pattern of things not quite working, of doors closing, of yourself feeling smaller than you know yourself to be, is not random. It is not your fault, but it is connected to you. And understanding that connection is where the power begins. I want to be clear about something before we go any further. Whatever you're going through, whatever form this has taken in your life, you have sovereignty over your path, over your choices, over the direction of your life. That sovereignty cannot be taken from you, but it can be obscured. It can be buried under enough confusion, enough fear, enough carefully managed chaos that you forget it is there. And forgetting it is there is the closest thing to losing it that actually exists. So everything I'm about to share is in service of one thing: helping you remember. Now let's talk about what this actually is. There are people who approach this strategically. People who scout, who select, who look within their own circles, their friends, their family, their acquaintances, and see not people, but resources. They're looking at whose path is most promising, whose energy is most abundant, whose potential is moving towards something worth intercepting. And using spiritual tools, readings, practitioners, directed intention, they access information about your life that you haven't even fully claimed for yourself yet, and may not even know. And then they make a decision about what to do with what they find. And then there are people who cast far more carelessly, driven by reaction. Your light might irritate their darkness. Your beauty triggers their insecurity. Your financial momentum stirs something in them that cannot tolerate someone else's abundance. A binding, a beauty spell, a financial block, sex magic directed at someone simply because their confidence is unbearable to witness. You were not targeted because you did something wrong or because you are weak. You were targeted because something in you was worth stealing. Because from where they were standing, in their lack mindset, what was written for you looked worth the effort of trying to redirect it towards themselves. That is the motivation. And the forms this taking can assume are more varied than most people realize. Sometimes it is a destiny swap, systematically absorbing your identity, your gifts, your trajectory, while offloading their own shadow onto you, wearing your future like a coat they picked up off the floor. Sometimes it's a financial binding. From the accounts of others who have experienced bindings in different areas of their lives, it shows up as stuckness, doors closing for no clear reason, momentum that inexplicably stalls, a version of yourself that feels somehow smaller than you know yourself to be, without being able to explain why, a ceiling that shouldn't be there, a resistance that has no logical source, a life that keeps stopping just short of where it should be going. Sometimes it is what certain traditions call a spiritual marriage, in this part of the world, you may know it as simply a tie. I haven't experienced this personally, but I have heard it described in enough detail by enough people that I cannot leave it unnamed. A tie commissioned without someone's knowledge or consent is intended to bind their provision to another person, to siphon their financial flow and their stability in that person's direction. And what it produces in the target from the accounts is often a pattern of inexplicable financial instability. A sense that no matter how hard you work, how carefully you plan, how diligently you build, something always seems to redirect what should be yours. But the financial instability is not the only thing it produces. Those who have experienced a tie describe a feeling of being watched, of being followed, even when alone, even when there's no rational explanation for it. A persistent sense that something unseen has access to them. A feeling of restriction, of being bound, as though there is an invisible ceiling on how far they can move, how fully they can expand into the life that was designed for them. And then there are the intrusive thoughts that don't feel like theirs, thoughts that arrive uninvited and sit in the mind with a weight and a persistence that feels foreign, thoughts that destabilize, that keep them cycling in confusion and self-doubt long after any external trigger has passed. I think about someone I know well, an elder now, a man who was by all accounts deeply and genuinely in love with one woman, and then inexplicably, in a way that never quite made sense to anyone who knew him, found himself married to another. Not the woman he loved, a different woman entirely. A union that, it should be said, did not last. But knowing what I know about ties, about spiritual marriages, about the way focused intention directed at another person can create compulsions that feel from the inside like a choice, I find myself wondering whether what looked like a decision was actually a direction, whether what appeared to be a change of heart was something else entirely. I cannot say with certainty, but I can say that the question sits differently now than it would have before I understood that this is possible. If any of that is familiar, hold it, because it may not just be your imagination, and it may not just be coincidence. Now here's what I want you to understand about these forms of attack. They're not magic in the way we have been taught to think about magic, something exotic and separate from ordinary life. They work by finding the fears you haven't fully looked at yet, the insecurities you have learned to work around rather than heal, the wounds you have buried deep enough that you almost forgot they were there. And then they pull on those threads to a thought, a fear, a doubt, a projection. And because somewhere deep down that fear already lives in you, the thought feels plausible. It feels like yours. It feels like it could be true. That is how it attaches. Not to something broken in you, but to something unresolved. And here's why healing changes everything. The more genuinely you resolve those fears, the more honestly you look at those places and do the work of healing, the less it has to work with. It arrives, and instead of feeling like your own thought, you can look at it clearly and say, no, that doesn't belong here. That is not who I am. Not as an affirmation you're trying to convince yourself of, but as a simple fact that you know to be true. That is not a small thing. That is sovereignty in practice. The spiritual work does not operate in isolation. What happens in the unseen is always accompanied by deliberate, calculated action in the physical world. The two work in tandem. The spell work creates the conditions, the confusion, the stuckness, the dimming of your own clarity and confidence. And then the physical work moves in to reinforce the illusion, to make sure it's holding, to ensure that what happens in your daily life matches the thoughts, the fears, and the projections that have already been sent to your mind energetically, so that nothing in your external world contradicts what is running in your internal world. so that the illusion feels from the inside indistinguishable from reality. And through all of it, they are simply living their life, maybe present with you, composed, monitoring the effects, manipulating the environment, adjusting the pressure where needed, and performing normalcy with complete ease as though nothing is happening at all. Simply removing yourself from the company of these people, as necessary as that is not enough on its own. The association ends and the person leaves your life, and yet something remains. The cage they built doesn't automatically disappear when they walk out the door, because the lock was never in their hand, it was in yours. And here's something practical I want you to start doing if you can. Watch your thoughts, not in an anxious way or hyper-vigilant, but with a quiet and steady curiosity. Start to notice throughout the day, whenever negativity shows up in your thinking, where is this coming from? Does this thought feel like mine? Does it match who I know myself to be? Or does it feel like it arrived from somewhere else? Heavy and persistent and alien in a way I can't quite explain. Learning to distinguish what originates with you from what has been projected at you is one of the most powerful things you can do. Because once you can see the projection for what it is, once you can recognize the intention behind it, it loses its grip and it cannot attach to what you can clearly see and name. Because it means that the way out is not passive. The way out is getting honest with yourself about how you let this in. Looking at the wounds, the insecurities rooted in a deficit of self-love, the discomfort with boundaries, the overgiving, the overextending, the deeply held belief that putting yourself last was what love looked like. Every single one of those places was a door left open. And closing those doors, healing them from the inside, is how you take your power back. I see this experience, all of it, as a gift. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it forced me to look at every wound I had been quietly working around for years. And what I found on the other side of that looking was not just healing. It was clarity, strength, and a sovereignty over my own life that I don't believe I would have found any other way. The insecurities, the boundaries I didn't feel entitled to enforce, the martyrdom dressed up as love. Every single one of those places was a door left open. I'm closing them, not all at once or perfectly, but deliberately and with more willingness than I have ever had before. Because I now understand, in a way I couldn't before, that my healing is not just personal, it is my protection. And I want to be clear about what was intended by all of this. Not simply to slow me down or redirect what was mine. The intention was to break me completely, so thoroughly and so irreparably that I would not be able to get up again. That the person I was supposed to become would never arrive, and that the story would simply end there in the rubble of everything that had been built against me. And for the swap to work, for the whole operation to be complete, I would have had to stay down, to fall apart so thoroughly that there was nothing left to dispute the narrative, because that was the final move. To point to the rubble and say, you see, I told you she was unstable, I told you she was insecure. Whatever story had been seeded about me in the minds of the people around us, the breakdown would have been the proof, the thing that made it all make sense in hindsight. But she underestimated me. I fell, and I got back up again. And I know now, viscerally and completely, in every part of me, that man plans and God wipes. Part 6D. What comes next is personal, and it is the reason I'm still here telling this story. Don't miss it.